Hey everybody, welcome to DOPEamine, the show that is like your mom's home cooking. Delicious, nutritious, and steeped in knowledge. Today I've got Brendan Alan Barrett on the show with me to talk about his podcast, The Business of Family and Selling, which is about sales excellence for moms, dads, husbands, who work with sales teams as it pertains to work-life balance. Brendan works with businesses and their sales teams to promote a healthy way of living to make sure the stress of sales isn't brought home. He shares some great book suggestions that led him down this path, which is something you should listen for when you listen to this podcast. At its essence, the episode is in service of work-life balance and selling without hurting the dynamic of the home life. So this is a great episode. I had a really lovely time, and well, I'm not going to waste your time anymore. Without further ado, welcome Brendan Alan Barrett to the show.
Drums, please.
Why north, west, south side, right, why, yeah, now here it is.
All right, Brendan Alan Barrett, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So for those not familiar with you, why don't you give us a little bit of a synopsis of who you are, what you do, and feel free to plug your website or anything like that too.
Sure. So I guess the simplest way to describe myself is I'm a budding podcaster. I'm about 30 episodes into the Business of Family and Selling, which is all about really sales excellence for moms, dads, husbands, and wives who either work in sales or manage sales teams as a sales manager or as a business owner. What I find is that a lot of people in those roles are moms, dads, husbands, wives, and their pursuit of sales excellence is, or sales leadership excellence is in service of not having to bring the mind junk home after work to legitimately be able to check out after 5 o'clock and not worry about, receiving calls at the dinner table or just being consumed because their sales machine is broken. And so we talk about, again, sales excellence in service of work-life balance, work-life integration. And then as a spin-off to some of my content stuff, I've got the Business of Family and Selling, and then the blog is Start in Phoenix, so startinphx.com, where, again, we talk about sales excellence. There's a whole story of how we got to that because it's a couple of pivots from where we started.
Right.
But yeah, from that, I help businesses do that. I work, sales managers and business owners hire me to help them, get their sales machine, their team operating like a well-oiled one so that, again, they can legitimately clock out at 5 o'clock and not have to bring home the headaches or the stress of work or have to field calls at the dinner table.
Right. What do you think is one of the biggest issues with people within those sales machine systems? Is it time management? Is it because I find that a lot of people who do end up doing more after hours feels like either psychologically they're not doing enough or there's some sort of time management issue. Do you find it's something within those or something? It's
definitely
else?
Two parts. It's funny. Like in my last interview with Landon Porter over in, what is this group? Getting Sales Without Being Salesy. People hire me to teach sales. Like, to my customers, I sell sales. But when I actually get into conversations, I'm either helping them with organization or,
right.
small tweaks to the things that they're doing 90% right. But it's that last 10% that's missing that makes a world of difference from them closing deals or generating opportunities and then closing deals and just not,
Right.
they're 90% there, but they're seeing zero of the positive result they're looking for. So it's two parts. It's one, organization, and then it's two, just the nuance of the craft of selling, of getting people's attention, winning their permission to sell, going through a discovery phase, and then communicating, the intersection between the value that company offers and the need or want that prospect has to fill.
Right. So do you find that people are kind of the variable? Like they feel like they know what they're doing, but you kind of come in and show them some nuances on how to manage their time better or to, get better organized. It seems like everything, there are things that kind of maybe guide them in a different direction, and then you kind of
Yeah,
come
it's
in
all
and
about
show them
perspective, right?
the
Like,
light.
um,
Right.
if you're newer to the craft of selling, some people get into starting their own
Hmm.
business because they're really good at something else, right? And now they want to do it on
Right.
their own
Hmm.
terms. They want to build a better mousetrap
Right.
or offer it a way that's more aligned with their core self, right? Rather than having to compromise their self and their values to fulfill somebody else's mission. So they go out on their own, but their craft is their craft. Their craft isn't selling their craft. That's a new thing that they have to learn.
Right.
And so there's a learning curve, and I help people get over that as fast as possible. Whether it is that early
Hmm.
stage entrepreneur or it's an entrepreneur who has a sales team of 5 or more people, and they've kind of been winging it, figuring it out as they go, and they're like, hey, we have deals that are falling through the cracks, or we're just not generating enough opportunities. We know our thing inside and out, but we can't find enough qualified people to have that conversation with. And unless you've been in those trenches for a while, or had the insight of somebody
Hmm.
who has been to guide you, like, hey, you need to be paying attention to these details. I mean, they fly right by you and you don't even realize you missed them. So I mean, that's what I help
Right.
people with. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel that, so I'm sure you've dealt with, many different levels of people in
Hmm.
business, brand new business, or someone who's been in it a while and they're just
Hmm.
missing something, or they're not adapting to new changes in the environment. Do you feel that sales is something that everyone can
Oh
learn?
yeah, yeah. I mean, my approach to say it, I mean, it's honest conversations. A lot of times, like some of the mind junk that I have to help people get over, usually it's like the employees of a business owner. So like their sales force, either their sales development reps who are out there finding opportunities, or their salespeople who walk somebody through a discovery phase. It's lowering the bar, right? Like, we're just people going out into the
Hmm.
world, having conversations, because from those conversations, we're going to find opportunities to play doctor, and then again, dial back into the customization of an offer or a pitch, so that a transaction that benefits both parties, can take place. And a lot of that is simply lowering the bar. And then with, the employers themselves, or a sales manager who, is overworked because they're keeping so much on their own plate rather than delegating it to the workforce that they have, their salespeople and their SDRs.
Hmm.
It's again
Right.
lowering the bar. Your employees are never going to be able to do it just as well as you do it. They're new to it, right? They haven't been doing it as long as you have
Right.
done it. But unless you delegate, they're never going to learn it. And then the other part of it is, like, they don't have to be able to do it as well as you do, like, to survive or to benefit the organization. Like, the thing is not going to go up
Hmm.
in flames if they say the wrong thing. They can excuse themselves, recorrect, and make up for it. I mean, deals are not won and lost in single sentences. Usually it's a bunch of micro steps, micro conversations that lead to inspiring somebody to do business with you. So in a lot of cases, it's just about lowering the bar, lowering the expectation.
Yeah, and you kind of briefly touched on, the language used
Hmm.
within sales, and I think a lot of people are really worried about being professional and
Hmm.
buttoned up, and that sales means a certain kind of acumen. Is that necessarily true, that someone has to be very buttoned up, or is it something where, like, you can show more personality? Obviously, maybe not dropping f
Yeah.
bombs here and
Yeah.
there or something like that, but does part of what you teach include, kind of letting some of those barriers down so you can kind of be more yourself and sell more
Yeah,
naturally?
so it's a funny thing, right? Like, when I first got into selling, I was still in college, right? And I come from a blue collar family where, like, those are the things. Like, sales guys are very buttoned up, they're very professional, they speak a certain way, and they're slimy. Right? Like, salespeople are out for themselves and
Right.
nobody else. That was,
Uh-huh.
and what I've learned is that sales and selling is not something that I have a bad taste for. It's poor salesmanship that I have a bad taste for.
Right.
Like, those images of salespeople stand out in my life, and were the narrative shared in my family, because they're so so terrifically terrible that like you can't help but remember them, right? When somebody
Right.
when somebody is really good at the craft of selling, you know, they're they do a fantastic job of qualifying fast and making sure that they're only pitching to people
Mm-hmm.
who would actually be interested in the thing, right?
Right.
And when that happens, a lot of times you don't even realize you're being sold to until you get to this point where like, I got to have this thing. And then you start to connect the dots looking backward and you're like, oh, I see what he did there. Right.
I just got duped.
Well, like, I mean, because people like to do business with people. I mean, that's never going to go out of style.
Right.
Even with all the technology, I mean, technology is great for alleviating some of the nuance of follow up, right? But I mean, it's still that personal touch that makes that technology work, and there's a certain element of a sales conversation and a buyer's journey that can't be replaced by machines or online content. It comes from building rapport with an actual person that you can come to know, like, and trust. And
Right.
I mean, how well you have to dress, how proper you have to speak really depends on who you want to sell to, who wants to buy from you.
Right.
And I mean, as a seller, especially if you're an independent creative or a business owner or a solopreneur, I mean, you have a lot of power to decide who you want to attract and who you want to do business with. And if those are people you enjoy hanging out with, they're probably going to talk and act and dress a lot like you. So, I mean, changing yourself to be better at sales. I mean, to be better in a specific sales job, maybe because you don't have all of those same choices to make to fit with, as a cog within somebody else's larger machine. But I mean, for a lot of people, that's the reason they go out on their own, right? So.
Yep, exactly. You can kind of do it on your own terms. And, Landon Porter speaks about often on his group, Getting Clients Without Getting Salesy. I suggest checking out that group
fantastic.
if you haven't.
Yeah.
It's so good. That's where I've been meeting a lot of my podcast guests lately, and they're so great. But Landon talks about essentially equating sales to relationships, like romantic relationships. Like you want to, and I think about that in respect to my journey with sales. I've never been a salesperson, but I've been a designer all of my life, working with salespeople, or growing up with my father, who's a sales guy, and he has his own business now. And it's kind of like naturally in me, but I'm also, I'm more so than actually employing those sales tactics, which I still do. I don't even like calling them tactics, really. It's a matter of, I've just kind of observed based on what salespeople wanted me to do within design that has kind of informed me of what works or doesn't work within sales. And for me, when because of that, I'm aware of marketing tactics. I've been aware of like sleazy sales tactics. And I think most of the general public is becoming wiser to cliche sales tactics. So I personally feel like impressed when somebody takes the time to learn who I am, to realize that I fit what they're offering, and finds a way to get that light bulb to go off in my head. That makes me feel, not only do I need their product or service, but it makes me feel special that they picked me as a person that deserves this product or service in a way. So yeah, that was a little aside for that, but I kind of wanted to ask what the impetus of this was, especially for, kind of the family side. It seems like maybe there's personal experience there. Is there something you want to speak to how you kind of started going about this with the family side?
My business, which I mean, when you get down to the nitty gritty, I'm a sales trainer, right? But like I identify with a podcaster and blogger because I started with a blog right after my son was born. He's three and a half now. And, up to that time I had graduated college. I had got a degree in communications with an emphasis in PR, moved out to Los Angeles, thought I was going to get a degree or, get an entry-level job writing for a PR agency or writing copy in a marketing agency. Nobody wanted to hire, nobody knew me, right? So nobody wanted to hire me full time. They only had like part-time gigs and internships and freelancing opportunities. And they're like, well, you're clearly looking for a full-time gig. So we're not even going to hire you because we're going to spend all this time training you and you're going to leave us high and dry when you do find a full-time gig. So I couldn't find an agency gig like I thought I was destined for. The first legitimate offer I got was selling for a construction company. And I had just come off the summer before a student painter's internship. So like, they train college kids how to go out and door knock and find work and then paint houses. And, it's supposed to teach you the skills of entrepreneurship through the exercise of operating a branch of this painting business. Right. So, I mean, I'd had that sales experience as like outside sales. Then my senior year of college, I worked retail, commission sales at a Radio Shack selling cell phones and components and police scanners, like all that weird stuff. And so that kind of queued me up like I was a perfect fit for what they were looking for. And so I'd been working for that company. They relocated me after about 8 months to Arizona. In Arizona, I'd been operating for a couple of years. When my son was born, it became very clear to me that like this 12 to 16 hours a day working, my fingers to the bone to close deals and learn an industry, like it wasn't sustainable. I didn't have that time to dedicate towards my craft to make up for my inexperience anymore. That time was, belonged to my family. And, now fast forward 3 years later, I'm, married to the love of my life. We kind of took some steps out of order, but like the whole time I'm experimenting with like, how do I work smarter and earn more without working more hours? Because up to that point, that was my solution. Want to make more money? Work more hours. Like that was something that I had because I didn't have a lot of money, or knowledge. So that was my solution. So I started with the blog. It started as Start in Phoenix. I was like, okay, I'm going to start this content marketing exercise. I'm going to start blogging and learning about this thing, this thing I'd kind of flirted with in college, public relations marketing, very related to, or very similar, and a lot of shared concepts to content marketing. But a couple of years have passed, so I don't know what's changed. Started experimenting with this blog. Started out as Start in Phoenix, and we abbreviate Phoenix PHX because I didn't really know what it was going to be. Start in Phoenix, it sounds progressive. It sounds like momentum. It sounds local. So that's what I went with, and it was a URL that was available. So that's what I started with for the blog. And I started writing about very vanilla professional development. How do you set SMART goals? How do you, create a 5-year plan? And I was creating, all these lead magnets and all these, and building a list and experimenting with social media to generate traffic for it. And as I was doing this, it's, having that content allowed me to start more conversations with people in different areas that I'd never met. It wasn't just local anymore. I was talking with people all over the world. And as it turns out, the people who are most interested in professional development are salespeople, want to be entrepreneurs, and early stage entrepreneurs. And the things that I could help them with most were how to find prospects and how to convert those prospects, how to win their attention, how to win their permission to sell, and then how to take them through a sales process, customize a scope of service, an offer or a pitch if you don't have that customizable of a product or service, and then convert them into a sale and everybody be happy after, as the transaction takes place. And so my content on the blog over at Start in Phoenix started to take a turn towards sales best practices. And then maybe about a year and a half ago, it wasn't even a year ago. It was like 8 months ago. I started, I was on my way out to a job. So I'm still working with that first construction company, in addition to a couple others over the years, as an independent rep. So basically I was self-employed, but working a job. Right. And so the blog was helping me figure out how do I build a business. But I'm headed out on a Sunday night to a job that starts at like 9 or 10 at night. It's 2 hours away from the house. So of course I'm listening to an audiobook, and it was a book that my now wife and I had decided that we were going to read or listen together, and it was going to give us a foundation to have conversations specifically about our finances. The book was Smart Couples Finish Rich, by I think David Bachman is his name. He's the latte factor guy. Like, this is just another one of his books. So like, as I'm listening to this thing, I'm hearing some good thoughts, but what I kept coming back to was like how interesting of a marketing mechanism this book is. I've always been fascinated by self-publishing. I actually self-published a book to Amazon. I don't even talk about it anymore because it's in that very vanilla professional development realm as opposed to sales and everywhere, where my business is going now. But like, how interesting is this thing? This book that couples buy together, similar to me and my, at that time, my fiance, they buy together so that they have a common language to talk about their own finances and maybe a few helpful tips, tactics to make it a little bit easier on one another. And I bet you that it's not just couples who are buying this book in pairs. They're buying 2 copies at a time, but it's moms, dads, grandmothers, grandfathers who are buying it in pairs to gift to newlyweds or engaged couples. And I'm like, that's a very interesting way.
If you've been dying to start that podcast about doves, or about your favorite jacket, or about a long lost love, or a murder mystery about a cat who murdered everybody, you can start it now on Spotify for podcasters. I've been on Anchor for a long time, and now it is officially Spotify for podcasters, and it has been a platform that has been growing for forever. And I love it, and I still use it to this day, and it has hosted this podcast for 500 plus episodes now. So I highly recommend it. It is free to use. Spotify for podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. I'm literally on my bed recording on my, the phone is on the bed, and I'm just talking, and it's not that complicated. And then you can distribute your podcast on Spotify and everywhere else that podcasts are heard. So video podcasts are available too if you want to show your pretty face and have people see you. And you can do all that too. So just do it. It's totally free, no catch. Give it a try. Spotify for podcasters. Let's go.
That's a huge way to market a book and share a message. Right. And so like my gears are turning, I'm kind of a content marketing junkie at this point, or nerd, trying to figure all this stuff out and just being entirely fascinated about it. I'm like, so what kind of book could I write that people would buy in pairs or gift in pairs? And for me, it was, I'm a sales guy, budding entrepreneur, solopreneur at the time, and kind of trying to figure like, how does a salesperson love? Like, I'm thinking of titles for this book. How does an entrepreneur raise a family? And so these are the thoughts that are going on in my head. I'm like, those are all great ideas. Those are books that I'd probably read or listen to. But I'm not an expert on that. So how do I write this book? Right? And what I was struck with was that I'm not an expert, but I could play journalist. I could start a podcast and interview other people who have more experience than me. Because again, I was only 2.5, almost 3 years into fatherhood. Not that experienced. I wasn't even married at the time. So what do I know about developing a relationship that stands the test of time? But I could go out and start conversations and record those conversations and broadcast it to the world and get feedback and create an audience who might then tell me what questions they want answered in such a book. And so that's where I started. I started with the podcast. Of course, I know nothing about audio. So I'm like, okay, well, that's a whole new skill I'd have to learn. So let's go minimally viable version of this. Let's make it a Facebook Live thing. Right. You get 2 people on the line, you hit, go live and you have your conversation and then you hit done and it's done. The content exists. There's no post-production. I could promote it a little bit, but I could also get feedback through the comments while we're live and people can steer the conversation. And so that's how the podcast started. And after recording about 25 to 30 of them, I had the cash flow through my coaching business to hire an editor and who does my show notes and got me set up, with Libsyn and, is it Libsyn or Lipson? I don't even know. I pay the bill and I don't even know how to pronounce it.
I don't remember. Yeah, it's as long as you're finding a way to get it done, it doesn't. Yeah, so it doesn't matter.
Well, like I hired out that part, right? And so now I didn't have the skill. Plus, I didn't have the bandwidth to learn the thing because still, I'm a dad. Now I'm a husband. I've got all these things that I'm responsible for. Again, I'm trying to figure out how to work less but make more. So I can't take on this huge extra endeavor. Right. So I found I did a minimally viable version of it. I found the cash flow to then sink into outsourcing the next version of it. Now we have 29 or 30 episodes published, and I've got another 15 in the can. So while my editor is working through those 15, I'm not even recording right now. I'm working on the promotion of it. And so I'm building a contributor network, and that can, so I've got interns and a couple of people who are interested in getting backlinks by writing, blog posts for Starting Phoenix. And so we're working on more and more content that refers to those interviews, plus other sources on whatever topic that we're writing about. Again, most of it is sales excellence, serving the purpose of work-life balance. But then we've also got stuff in the content calendar for like, books and games that'll teach your kids, about money and entrepreneurship or sales without them even realizing they're learning those kinds of things. So it's been an exciting journey. Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of great tools in there and I'm excited for really the gathering of all of that stuff. It's kind of interesting that we live in a world today where we can just put out content daily. You don't no longer have to be somebody that, if you're going to write a book, you're not just like getting a cabin in the woods and hiding away. You're putting out daily content, and then, after you get a certain number of articles or episodes or something, you can culminate that into a book and, make that a big thing and, kind of wrap up that chapter or something and then start something else or continue that path and do a version 2, who knows? But, it's a pretty rad journey that you're on. It seems like it's very honest, which is fantastic. And
thank you.
Which is not something a lot of people. Well, it's kind of unfortunate that a lot of people don't synonymize sales with honesty. And it's kind of the nice part about the world today is that if you're utilizing social media correctly, like you're doing with lives or sharing content and such, like people start to get to know you as a person, and there's really no room to be dishonest. People know you enough that they'll be able to pick you apart if they see that you're not being genuine. So along those lines, with what you're doing with Facebook Lives and blog posts and articles and interviewing people, are these some of the tools that you're teaching other people in sales as well to use tools, encouraging them to podcast or use social media, things like that to make sales or to transform some of the practices?
The major things is 1 is conversations, 2 is bandwidth, and then 3 is like lowering the bar. And I think lowering the bar helps you with the bandwidth issue. So for me, we don't need to know everything. That's the whole point of going out and starting conversations, right? We're not going to pitch everybody. Like a lot of people get little bent out of shape, like, I'm just going to go randomly talk to this person. I should know everything about them. It was like, no, that's the point of the conversation. Because what are you going to do? Scour the internet for information about them? Right. That stuff might be 2 years out of date, right? Like that's not pertinent to their life today. So why don't you just go?
And it's a little.
Well, yeah. So like you start dropping these little nuggets on them too, right? That they know they haven't told you about. So they're like, how do you know that? that's weird. And so like all of those defenses that you thought, those defensive walls that you thought you were going to break down by knowing all of that stuff are actually heightened because you know that stuff without it having been learned in a conversation. So, you know, that also feeds, if you're trying to work smarter rather than harder as a solopreneur who's, so small that, ads don't really make sense yet. You don't know what your sales playbook looks like. I mean, having conversations is huge. I mean, you gain so much insight from just going out and talking to people who you think are your ideal customer, because out of that pool, you'll realize that, people who are actually qualified to buy from me, either they find a value in the thing that they do or they can afford to buy from me. That's an even smaller cluster of folks than what I thought was my ideal customer. Or after talking to these people who I thought were my ideal customer, I know that none of them are, and I need to find another pool to fish in because there's just a complete mismatch. And by having that conversation, rather than if your product is a book, rather than running into the forest and whacking away at the keyboard to write this book and then go publish it and find out nobody wants to read it, you could have avoided doing all that hard work in vain and then have it be a big failure. That also protects your bandwidth too. Like, I mean, you didn't waste all of that time writing a book to find out nobody's going to buy it from you and then be totally broke because you exhausted your savings and now you got to go work a job you don't want. That's going to make you miserable because you outran your runway. A lot of people who start a business, it's either because, they've saved up the money. This is the thing that they're going to do. They've decided they want to do it, but they have limited resources, or, they lose a job and they need to make some income, right? Like, I mean, that's why we all work. So being smart about it and conversations help you validate those different paths that you go down before you outlast your resources. So having conversations, doing the simplest thing, the easy things first. Those are things that we try to focus on. And a lot of it happens over the phone. I teach a lot of phone prospecting, pair that with email prospecting, pair that with connecting with people on social media, being visible on social media, and then creating conversations. It's one thing to have a conversation in the comments. You can build another level of rapport by having a conversation in Messenger. That can't even be matched by the level of rapport that you can have over the phone. And then there's nothing that replaces from sitting in front of somebody and like breathing the same air and being able to, share that time and place with somebody. That's a pretty high level of rapport. All of those technological ways, the social media, the email, the phone, can get you to that place. And in some cases, you don't need to actually share the same space, breathe the same air as somebody else to make a deal happen. But it certainly makes it easier. And so a big focus too in my business and in my clients' business is, we have all these tools, right? And we could sell all over the world, but why don't we stick close to home where we have that more opportunity to be physically with our prospects? Because, as we're still sharpening our skills, we want everything in our favor. And that's just one more powerful tool that we have the opportunity to yield if we have proximity to the people that we're selling to.
Yeah, and it kind of helps that you have things in common because they're people that are physically in the same area. Start in Phoenix is a perfect example of that. Like, it's pretty clear who you're talking to or you're trying to talk to. And it just so happened that you reached beyond that at some point. But it's like, it's not necessarily a good move to be in Oregon and trying to market to people in Louisiana when you've never been to Louisiana or nothing about them.
I mean, it's little things, right? And you can learn about a new location, but that's going to take time, right? The Southwest compared to the Northwest, compared to the Midwest, compared to the South and the East, like they're, subcultures. Yeah, we share a lot of things. We're all human beings, right? But there's little nuances, just like, going from whatever craft it is that you have that you decide to build a business around, and then having to learn the craft of sales and selling in addition to that. it takes time to learn anything. And so when you keep it simple, lean into your, the skills and the assets and the tools that you already have, rather than trying to add new ones. You're going to be able to pick up more momentum. And then when you have that momentum, then, your next weakest link is a little bit outside of your, your current wheelhouse. Then you can start adding those things. But like, to go run out into the world and try to start from scratch, like, oh man, that's so hard. Like, you've been creating who you are and what you're interested in since you were first born. Right? Like, do you have that time? Do you have that much of a runway, 30, 40, 50 years to learn something entirely new? Probably not. Right. So, at a certain point it might implode and you might be back to working a job you don't like.
Yeah. And that sounds horrible. Nobody wants to do that. Yeah. I mean, play off of your strengths. Even this conversation is a good example of, basically, you're talking about, I just had the words come in my head, like social compound interest, because it's kind of like, saving money, but it's like, kind of putting all of this knowledge to good use is like continuing to build that social compound.
It's a really interesting thought too, because like when I first got into sales, I was like, no, it's about logic, right? Like, I hate when people get super buddy with me and it seems very, disingenuous, right? Like, because you could certainly tip the scales that way. Right? Like, you see it with less experienced salespeople, younger salespeople, or, somebody who's been taught by, somebody who wasn't that much more experienced than them. Like, it doesn't roll off the tongue. It does seem very manufactured. Right. And so like when I first got into sales, I was very like, building rapport didn't seem super, like, building credibility was one thing. Being able to say, hey, I know this thing inside and out. So, I'm worth us having a deeper conversation so I can play doctor and figure out what you need or what you want, and then customize the scope of work. And then when I tell you the price, you're going to be like, yeah, of course, because Brendan knows what he's talking about. Like, he's demonstrated that he's a credible, source authority on painting houses or construction or cell phones or whatever the thing was that I was selling, right? And so I was very anti building rapport, or I didn't put a lot of weight into it. And what I've come to realize is that, more and more so people buy first off of emotion, right? And some of that is credibility. Another is like, how do you make the person feel? Do they want to see you, come back to their house to do the project, or see, receive calls from you throughout the week because you're part of the fulfillment process of whatever it is that you sold to them. So like, people buy off of emotion, and then they still need the logic component. Like, the deal has to make sense, right? Or they still won't buy because they'll talk themselves out of it. So the logic component is important too. They're both important, but building rapport, I mean, it even plays into you being able to go through a discovery phase and actually get truth out of the prospect, because without the truth, you can't customize your offer or your pitch of an offer in a way that they need to hear. Sales is very one-to-one communication, right? You could communicate the same idea, the same thought, maybe 100 different ways, but unless it's that one way that individual prospect needs to hear it to connect emotionally and logically to the decision, then it's going to be misfire. You're not going to hit the target. It's not going to land, and the deal is not going to get done. But if you've built up trust and rapport by being somebody that they like, and you don't have to do it by being overly, cheesy and buddy. I mean, it's as simple as leading with questions and getting them to talk about what excites them. I mean, that's one of my favorite questions when I first meet somebody. It's like, hey, I'm Brendan. What's your name? Hey, how you doing? And then it's like, so what are you working on? What's got you excited these days? And like, boom, then they start, because usually what's exciting to somebody is what is something that they found that they're kind of good at, or they're excited to be good at, or they're making a ton of progress. And when they do that, they get an opportunity to brag. Right. And when we brag, we actually, I was just listening to podcast. Oh, I think Jeb Blunt mentions it in his new book, Sales EQ, that like there's this research that they were mapping people's brains when they bragged about themselves, and when somebody brags about themselves, they get a dopamine hit. Like so, they're getting more and more pumped up with every opportunity they get to brag about themselves, and then as people do, we get a little addicted to that, and so now you've become interesting to them because you're the source of that good feeling. And so, you became interesting, not because you said anything profound, but because you got them to feel good, because you gave them an opportunity to talk about themselves. And now they start to spill the beans. They start to trust you a little bit more. Their defense, they feel good, so they have less defenses. And so when you ask questions that they might not answer truthfully to somebody who hasn't given them that feeling, they'll answer truthfully for you, which gives you a better perspective to, again, customize an offer or a pitch that they're going to need to be able to move forward and make a transaction with you. Otherwise, it's going to miss for one reason or another.
Yeah, you're appealing to the emotional barrier that people have. You're trying to create a sort of positive and love response and trying to avoid the fight or flight response. Because a lot of the times when, like, especially young sales guys, they'll come up to you, like, think of like a flea market scenario or something. And you get those guys that are like tapping you on the shoulder or waving something in front of your face. And you're just like, hey, here's my thing. And that could be an analogy for something else. And basically it's like, you get this visceral, like, no, get away from me. This feels terrible. Or you can feel in the words that they're using that they're trying to like penetrate your brain. And there's more like sexual things there. That's weird. It's like, it's like they're trying to, elicit that sales one night stand as opposed to trying to build a meaningful relationship. And as an extension to that, I wanted to ask you about when you're teaching sales, are you appealing, and like how much of that do you discuss psychologically with those elements? Like you said, you talked about the Sales EQ book and emotional quotient and appealing to people psychologically. Like what elements, or is there like examples of some of that stuff? I mean, I know you talked about it just a lot, but
so I listened to when Jeb's book came out, or when I first discovered it. Maybe I missed the launch, and I downloaded it, and I was driving up north to take my little boy fishing, and I listened to that book from start to finish in like 2 days. But the big thing that it reinforced for me is that people don't like to be wrong, and that's a big part of social or emotional intelligence, is that, in some cases it needs to sound like it was their idea. or you need to play the yes and game.
Absolutely.
Because even though they're totally wrong, telling them straight up they're wrong is going to close them off to figuring it out. Right. So you could, instead of no, you're wrong, this is what's actually happening. I mean, you could go with, yes, and we got this thing going on over here, so this works this way and that way, and they'll start to figure out themselves that, like, oh yeah, that thought I had to do that I had, that's totally irrelevant. We're going to follow Brendan now because, he had my attention long enough, because I didn't clam up. I didn't put my defenses up because he told me I was wrong. I followed him long enough to totally forget about my stupid idea that he was nice enough to tell me wasn't, or nice enough to skip telling me how stupid I was.
That's funny. It's interesting too, is that we kind of have to remember, and just like the whole appealing to, making sure that someone else feels like it's their idea, kind of reminded me of when you're kids, like you like parents, good parents will reinforce when a kid feels proud about something, or they're feeling good about decisions they made, like, oh, that's so smart, or that was such a good idea. And like, you don't want to talk to them condescendingly, but just to appeal emotionally, like that doesn't change in people. People want to feel good about themselves. They want to talk about themselves, which is why I start this podcast by asking you to talk about yourself. Because
I
it's
feel
going to
really
feel
great.
good. It's something that you know, and it kind of creates right. It creates a positive entry point, and then for me, I start to ask questions. And using this podcast as an example, I do that. I start to ask questions. I start to get to know you a little bit more, because while I have you answer questions before going on this podcast, and I have a link to your website and stuff, I don't really dive that deep, because I want to be able to talk to you. I want to get to know you and appeal to who you really are, and be able to, get some of that honest truth and those good nuggets of information out of you to share with the people, that in turn will, hopefully get people coming to you.
Yeah.
And then we'll get to know each other. And if I ever see anybody mention or ask a question about sales, I'm going to tag you right away, because you're the guy. And you'll be more likely to share my podcast, and we help each other, and life's great, and we just, we're drinking beer on rainbows, and everything's amazing.
I like that imagery.
So it's like it's appealing to the positivity that we want to feel within ourselves, and nurturing each other's emotional needs, and we can't forget that, especially within men. I think is interesting, because we kind of forget that men can be emotional as well. And and a lot of sales guys will kind of take the stoic route, and may not appeal to someone's needs. They may just go straight logical, and go for that one night stand. And they got to take the time, and they need to learn emotionally, and being able to speak to that on this podcast is great. And I think we have way more that we can speak to in the future, if you're willing to do a follow-up in the future.
Absolutely. I think there's a second part to that getting people to talk and getting them to feel better about themselves also loosens us up as the person starting the conversation. If you are a creative or a solopreneur or a salesperson, and you've got those nerves about going out in the world and starting conversations with strangers, like by leading with very simple questions, non-technical questions, getting to know people, it helps you. Of course, it helps you qualify. I mean, for me, prospecting, starting conversations is market research first, and there's a lot of lessons that we can learn. The holy grail of lessons is that, hey, this is a qualified prospect, I should pitch them. But that's not always the case. Sometimes we find out very quickly that they're not qualified, but we might also, gain insight from that as to why, which helps us in the future. But for us as the seller, as the person doing the prospecting, as the person going out into the world and starting conversations, we can get nervous, but by making it about them, getting them to open up to us, we find ourselves more comfortable on, oh shoot, I just learned a new term for this. Give me 1 second here. The dominant hierarchy.
I mean, you essentially feel like a trustworthy person.
Human beings, we have this dominance hierarchy. Where do we fit in this society, in the layer cake of the culture that we find ourselves in? And we worry about where we're at, because we want, the person on the other end is trying to place us on that hierarchy so they can decide whether or not to listen to us. And us, we want to know where we're at so that we can feel confident in our pitch, or, cower in fear, if we feel like we're too far down that hierarchy. And so by leading with questions, by making it about them, getting them to open up to us rather than us doing a bunch of talking and pitching, we find out very easily how close we, typically the result is that we find out how similarly we're positioned on that hierarchy. And I gain all kinds of confidence as the seller, as the person doing the prospecting, as the person with an agenda, to make suggestions, make recommendations, or walk away without having to have my pride bruised because the guy told me no, because, well, heck, he wasn't qualified anyways. Why should I, why should I have gone through the experience of rejection? I should have known better than to pitch him in the first place. So by leading with those questions, not only do they get pumped up and feel comfortable with us, but we get pumped up and feel comfortable with them.
Yeah, and I've been pumped up this entire
Good.
conversation, so this has been great. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up because I do have another call in about 5 minutes. But thank you for being on the show. This was rad, and I hope we can do a follow up in the future. There's plenty of other topics I'm sure we can break down when it comes to sales, psychology, mindset, people, and just see where you're at in a few months. See how many podcasts you've done, and just kind of celebrate what you've done over the coming months.
Yeah,
If
this
that's
was a
something that we
blast.
get
Thank
together
you
and
for
do,
the
that'd be rad.
invitation. This is a lot of fun.
Awesome. Great. So if you guys would leave a review on iTunes, that would be dope. And Brendan, hold on. I'll talk to you after I stopped hitting record, and we'll talk to you guys next time. See ya. Hey, you beautiful human. Thanks for listening to DOPEamine. I really appreciate it. If you thought this was a dope show, then you should wait until next week. But also, while you wait, you should go to iTunes and Stitcher and leave a positive review. Positive reviews help me to fill up my dopamine tank. Otherwise, you can send your friends to dopamine.life to listen to the show, or hi, my name is Christian.com to get the latest updates. I'll catch you later.
Baby, I'm a fiend, oh, you know you got me going off your dopamine. All I need is for you to put me on to the recipe, yeah. Ooh, purple flowers, candy showers in the air. You dance for hours as I watch from overhead. It's a my thing, you got me going off your dopamine, yeah. It's a my thing, you got me going off your dopamine.